Hey guys! Tonight we're taking a nice, sleepy little walk through the foggy marble courtyards of the Forbidden City. You stand still beneath a sky so gray it's almost soft, the scent of rain and incense lingering in the air as palace servants shuffle quietly around you. It's July of 1572, and the air is humid, sticky, and heavy with expectation. Somewhere behind a silkscreen, a child yawns. That child? That's you, Ju Yijun, about to become the Wanli Emperor of the Ming Dynasty. You're 9, you're sleepy, you want a snack, but instead, you're about to get one of the most powerful jobs in the world. You sit, stiff and confused, in front of hundreds of staring officials in embroidered robes that probably cost more than a small province. Trumpets blare. Someone reads a speech in that endless, droning monotone that always puts you to sleep during lessons. But today's different. Today, your dad has just died, and everyone keeps calling you Your Majesty. They bow so deeply their hats wobble. You blink. A moth flutters past your face. The gold-trimmed crown they've placed on your head is 2 sizes too large and smells faintly of camphor. And just like that, you're emperor. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not exactly ruling anything yet. In fact, your job mostly consists of trying not to fall asleep during ceremonies and occasionally being fed candied plums while everyone else decides the fate of the empire. To be fair, that's not so different from what most grown emperors do, but at least they have the decency to pretend they're listening. You, on the other hand, can still get away with a nap under your sleeve during state audiences. You are, after all, a literal child. Your mother, Empress Dowager Li, hovers somewhere in the background, ever watchful. But the real boss right now is Grand Secretary Zhangju Cheng, a sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued scholar official who seems like he hasn't smiled in 15 years. He immediately steps into the vacuum of power and begins reshaping the empire like it's his favorite paper-cutting hobby. Taxes are reorganized, corruption, briefly, curbed, and the economy slowly starts to purr under his stern, spreadsheet-like watch. You, meanwhile, are still mastering the art of sitting still for 3 hours without screaming, an underrated skill for a monarch. Everything smells faintly of lacquered wood and warm tea. Time moves oddly here in the palace. Slow, syrupy, and somehow always sleepy. The sun rises over the curved rooftops of the Forbidden City, and you're already being dressed by 4 separate people who argue about sleeve length like it's a matter of national security. You learn how to bow, how to nod at just the right angle, how to recite Confucian maxims without accidentally quoting the wrong dynasty. Honestly, it's a miracle you remember your own name some days. You play with tiny porcelain soldiers in the cracks of the palace floor, while officials argue about grain quotas. Occasionally, you stick one in your pocket and forget about it until bath time. The older ministers murmur approvingly about how obedient and serious you are, completely missing the fact that you're daydreaming about turning your sedan chair into a race cart. You're 9. You'd rather be riding horses or watching shadow puppets, not managing a massive imperial bureaucracy. But history has a way of picking rulers who'd rather be doing literally anything else. At night, when the palace falls silent and the lanterns flicker like sleepy fireflies, you lie on silk sheets, staring up at the carved ceiling and wondering what it all means. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. One of your tutors insists that the emperor is the son of heaven, a cosmic linchpin holding the universe together. You just hope the universe has something good for breakfast tomorrow. Historians still argue whether your early reign actually counts as your reign at all. Zhang Zhuzheng essentially ran the empire in your name for your entire childhood and then some. Some say that was good. He was efficient, organized, and terrifyingly punctual. Others say it stunted your political growth and made you bitter. You mostly just remember him being loud. Here's a fun tidbit. The imperial throne you sit on? It's so ornate and uncomfortable that you once tried to sneak a cushion onto it and caused a minor scandal. The palace staff still whispers about the Great Cushion Incident as if it were a coup. Still, you grow. Gradually. You learn to keep a straight face when someone offers a tribute of 300 jars of fermented fish paste. You nod solemnly when a minor prince begs you to send him more horsehair for his winter coats. You even start mimicking Zhang's brisk nods and sharp, syllable-efficient speeches, though yours occasionally trail off when you spot a butterfly. Occasionally, someone gets executed. Usually for corruption, or possibly just for annoying the wrong eunuch. You try not to think about that part too much. One time you accidentally signed an execution order thinking it was a birthday card. That one kept you up at night for weeks. But mostly it's quiet. Long, unhurried days of ceremonies, rituals, and practice. Always practice. Every move rehearsed, every sentence calculated. You start to feel less like a boy and more like a statue that breathes. When Zhang walks by, you straighten your back instinctively, like he's made of thunder and test scores. And then, just as you begin to get used to the rhythm of things, it shifts. You hit your teens, Zhang's health begins to fail, and the careful order he built starts to wobble like a top running out of spin. But that's for later. Right now, you sit in your vast, echoing study, nibbling on dried persimmons while the empire hums along without you. Outside, the wind stirs the pine trees in the palace gardens. A servant adjusts your robe. Somewhere, someone is calling you the radiant axis of all under heaven. You just want another snack. You wake up to the sound of yet another gong, followed by a chorus of officials clearing their throats in that respectful, mildly phlegmy way they do before a long lecture. You're not sure which is worse, the sound itself or the knowledge that it's the start of another day of studying the classic of rites for the 15th time this week. Your slippers are already placed perfectly beside your bed, and before you can even stretch, someone's brushing your hair and fastening your jade pendant. You're 13 now, practically ancient in court kid years, still treated like a toddler with a crown. Your daily life is structured like an overachieving spreadsheet. Morning greetings, ceremonial breakfast, 4 hours of Confucian philosophy, calligraphy drills, more philosophy, maybe a war report if someone decides you can handle it, then more philosophy. And somewhere between lunch and sundown, if you're lucky, you get 20 minutes of staring at the koi pond and wondering if one of them has the same life you do. Trapped in a gilded world of round walls and predictable meals. The palace has dozens of tutors, scholars with wispy beards and voices like soft sandpaper, each one more excited than the last to explain why you absolutely must understand the doctrine of the mean before you're allowed to breathe without supervision. Occasionally, they get into turf wars over who has the privilege of tutoring you in something as exciting as moral virtue through seasonal metaphors. And you listen, sort of. Your eyes glaze over in a dignified way that passes for concentration. You nod at the right times. You recite the proper proverbs. But in your head, you're trying to remember whether the turtle in the West Pond actually blinked yesterday or if you imagined it. This, you realize, is what power feels like before you're allowed to actually use it. Zhang Zhuzheng, your ever-watchful Grand Secretary, has assigned these scholars personally. He believes in discipline, routine, economic reform. You suspect he also believes in zero fun. The man is so obsessed with productivity that once, when a palace astrologer tried to reschedule a ceremony due to a bad energy day, Zhang replied with, "The calendar serves the state, not the other way around," and went right ahead with it. Bold move, also mildly terrifying. He still technically works for you, but let's be honest, you don't run this empire. He does. You're more of a ceremonial houseplant with calligraphy homework. But Zhang runs things well. Grain is moving. Roads are being fixed. Corrupt officials are being demoted with satisfying regularity. People in the provinces grumble less than usual, which counts as high praise in a country this large. Historians still argue whether Zhang's iron grip was more helpful or harmful in the long run. Some say he gave the empire a much-needed tune-up, like taking a rusty bike in for repair. Others say he did all the pedaling while you learned absolutely nothing about how to steer. Either way, he's keeping everything from catching fire right now, and that's fine by you. Still, there are small pleasures. Your calligraphy has become genuinely impressive. One of the palace eunuchs swears he saw a crane bow respectfully to one of your scrolls. You've also developed a taste for intricate miniature furniture, commissioning doll-sized beds and tea sets for no particular reason other than, as you once told an official, they bring me peace. Fringe court gossip whispers about your obsession with arranging little chairs in dramatic tableaus. You're not bothered. You're the emperor. If you want a tiny pinewood chaise lounge with inlaid pearl armrests, you shall have it. 5, in fact. One afternoon, after an especially long tutoring session on the rectification of names, you ask if the empire would collapse if you skipped tomorrow's session. Zhang is summoned. He gives you a look that could stop a locust swarm mid-flight. You go back to your books. You learn more than you think, though. You memorize maps of provinces you've never seen. You understand how to speak without saying anything. How to smile like you're agreeing when you're actually planning an internal escape route. You develop a mental catalog of which officials fidget when they lie. And over time, you learn the fine art of bureaucratic camouflage, how to appear engaged while mentally arranging your next miniature throne room. There's one odd moment that sticks with you. A soft-spoken tutor tells you that the greatest emperors are those who listen more than they speak. You think about that a lot, possibly while pretending to listen to him talk about crop rotation for the third time. But here's the thing they don't teach in your thousands of hours of benevolence ethics: how to feel anything real when everyone's watching. Everyone has an opinion about what you should say, eat, wear, think. You're a symbol before you're a person. A ceremonial chess piece wrapped in dragon brocade. Some nights, you lie awake and try to remember what your father sounded like, and the memory slips through your fingers like mist. And when you're not studying, you're being paraded. Paraded through seasonal rituals, temple visits, ancestor sacrifices. You kneel on cold marble while the priest drones. You burn incense that smells like bitter oranges and old sandalwood. Occasionally, something catches your attention, like a white heron landing on the sacrificial altar, or a eunuch tripping over his own robe and pretending nothing happened. There's a fringe belief in court that your dreams matter, that they carry divine significance. Once, you tell someone about a dream you had where your calligraphy brush turned into a fish and swam away. The next week, you receive 3 painted scrolls interpreting it as a sign of cosmic harmony. You stop sharing your dreams after that. Too much paperwork. One fringe historian even claims that during these early years, you developed a secret language with a palace dog, communicating through subtle tail flicks and blink patterns. This is obviously not true. The dog was clearly illiterate. Still, a funny image. By the time you're 15, you've outgrown several tutors and memorized more philosophical concepts than most of your ancestors ever did. You've also reached the age where, technically, you could start making decisions. Zhang, of course, still thinks of you as a ceremonial teenager who'd lose track of a military campaign somewhere between lunch and nap time. And maybe he's not wrong, but you're growing tired of being managed, of watching people shuffle papers in your name, of living in a palace you can't really explore, ruling a country you're not allowed to touch. You want something. You don't know what it is yet, just not this. Outside, the pine trees bend gently in the evening breeze. You press your forehead to the cool window frame and watch the shadows stretch across the inner courtyard. Somewhere below, a servant lights another lantern. The glow dances across the stone like a whispered secret. Tomorrow will come. Another lesson. Another list of expectations. But tonight, for a brief moment, you're just a boy again? Morning arrives with the dull thud of ceremonial drums and the overly chipper voice of a eunuch announcing, "May your majesty arise and receive the blessings of the new day." You groan, not because you're ungrateful for celestial blessings, but because you know what's coming. A whole day of pretending you're still not the one in charge. You're technically emperor. In every ceremony, every formal address, every scroll etched with gold, you are the son of heaven. But in practice, you're just the guy in the fancy hat while Grand Secretary Zhang Zhuzheng does the actual ruling from behind his mountain of ledgers and tax memos. He's been doing it since you were 9. Now you're in your mid-teens, and the empire is still running on Zhang-powered steam. The man has a presence, tall, severe, with eyes like 2 inkwells that have never known joy. Every official you meet either reveres him or fears him, sometimes both. You're not sure which group you fall into. Zhang is obsessed with order. He reorganized the land tax, revised bureaucratic ranks, even kept track of who owed back rice like a supernatural accountant. Historians still argue whether his reforms were progressive brilliance or low-key tyranny wrapped in polite calligraphy. But no one can deny he kept the Ming machine well-oiled, even if he did bark at people for misfiling grain reports. And you? You hover like a ghost in your own government? You attend court sessions, nod when you're supposed to, and occasionally stamp things with your name when Zhang tells you it's important. You're not exactly sure what half of it means, but you sign, then go back to wondering whether the peonies in the southern garden are about to bloom. One time you tried to speak up. It was a small suggestion, maybe more funding for music in the palace schools. Zhang looked at you like you'd just requested a fleet of warships for a poetry contest. Majesty, he said, let us focus on what truly strengthens the realm. You never brought it up again. Still, there's no denying that he's effective. Under his watch, the treasury fills back up. Roads get repaired. Corrupt officials mysteriously lose their jobs, or, more mysteriously, disappear altogether. He even initiates massive land surveys to curb estate hoarding, although half the landed elite immediately try to reinterpret their borders. One noble insists his goose farm qualifies as sacred land. You don't ask. Everywhere you go, people bow deeper when Zhang is around. You once saw a provincial governor flinch just hearing his footsteps echo through the corridor. It's like being haunted by a very efficient ghost. But while Zhang is busy running the empire, you're quietly building a case for yourself. A mental list of all the times he ignored your ideas, silenced your opinions, or scolded you like a naughty schoolboy. You're still young, but you're not stupid. You know he's kept you on a leash, and you're beginning to resent it. Your private quarters, meanwhile, are your sanctuary. You've taken to staying up late, reading stories of ancient emperors and their legendary deeds. Not the real stuff, of course. Those scrolls are mostly cautionary tales about how not to mismanage floods. No, you prefer the romanticized histories, full of daring disguises, night rides through moonlit provinces, and strategic brilliance under dramatic thunder. You imagine yourself as that kind of emperor, not the one who gets outshone by a secretary with excellent penmanship. You start sneaking into lower court sessions just to observe, disguised in simpler robes, sitting behind a screen. Nobody suspects you. It's your first taste of raw politics, and it's underwhelming. A lot of people arguing about who's supposed to fix a bridge. Still, you keep coming back. Because slowly, you're learning who's loyal, who's lazy, who just parrots whatever Zhang says. There's a fringe tidbit whispered in the court. Zhang Zhuzheng supposedly keeps a private diary where he ranks officials not just by performance, but also by whether they sigh too loudly during meetings. No one has seen it, but the idea alone has everyone paranoid and perpetually polite. You overhear a lot during these sessions. A discussion about unrest in the north, a report of a scholar writing a scandalous poem comparing Zhang to a controlling mother hen. He's immediately reassigned to plum blossom cataloging duty. One junior official quietly mutters, "The emperor doesn't even rule," not realizing how thin the screen is. You remember his name. You remember all their names. The more you see, the more you understand. And the more you understand, the more frustrated you become. Because beneath the polished rituals and tax reports, the empire is quietly fermenting. Peasant grumbles in the countryside. Local officials demanding bribes to release grain stores. Military garrisons with underpaid, underfed troops. You feel it, even if no one talks about it directly. And Zhang, he sees only systems, charts, metrics. His reforms squeeze every last ounce of efficiency from the administration, but they also make enemies. Nobles who lose land, corrupt officials who lose income, scholars who feel muzzled. The bureaucracy is cleaner now, yes, but also colder. And then, one spring morning, the bells toll differently. Zhang Zhuzheng is dead, just like that. A fever, a night of delirium, and the man who ruled the Ming with a brush and iron will is gone. You stare at the official announcement, your hands oddly still. No ceremony this time, no cheering, just silence, and a peculiar lightness in your chest. You don't cry, you don't celebrate, you just breathe. And then you start writing, in secret, at first. A list of officials you want promoted, others you want removed. You review policies Zhang enforced and quietly undo a few. You begin to replace his people with your people. You summon court sessions and actually speak at them. The same officials who once ignored you now sweat when you pause before answering. Historians debate whether what followed was maturity or vengeance. One thing's clear, you move fast. You strip Zhang's family of titles, confiscate his properties. There's talk of posthumous disgrace, though you eventually back down from that. It's not about cruelty, it's about carving out your own space in a palace that never really felt like yours. The bureaucracy scrambles to adjust. Everyone's watching you now, for the first time, truly watching. And the strange thing? You kind of like it. Not the power exactly, but the autonomy. The feeling that your words actually do something. Still, part of you can't help but glance over your shoulder sometimes, expecting Zhang to step around a column and correct your posture. But he doesn't. The palace is yours now, the empire too. And you're just getting started. You wake up and the world feels different. The air is quieter, though the same gongs ring out, the same servants bow, and the same incense curls lazily in the corners of the hall. But it's all missing one thing, Zhangju Zhang's long shadow. No more schedules so tight you couldn't sneeze without an edict. No more lectures about tax grain like it was a form of poetry. He's gone, and with him, the weight of being forever managed. For the first time, you are truly emperor. Not just the name embroidered on official robes, but the beating heart behind decisions. And wow, do you make some. A few out of boldness, a few out of pettiness, and many because, well, no one's stopping you anymore. The court doesn't know what to do with this new version of you. They fumble through bows and eye one another nervously. After years of assuming you were a quiet, decorative fixture, you're suddenly talking policy, reassigning ministers, and, this one causes a ripple, canceling some of Zhang's land reforms. You decide the man was brilliant, yes, but also exhausting. One of your first real moves is to restore certain privileges to the gentry who Zhang once cut down to size. After all, they're powerful, land-rich, and always in the mood to flatter. One even gifts you a jade cricket cage in the shape of a miniature pavilion. Completely useless. You love it. Historians still argue whether your early reversals of Zhang's reforms were political strategy or youthful rebellion. On one hand, you're removing the source of your personal frustration. On the other, you're also trying to build loyalty in a system that now feels very unsure of you. And this is where things begin to slow, not fall apart, not yet, but slow. Because you, with your new freedom, begin to pull back. It's subtle at first. You delegate more. You postpone meetings. You turn down court audiences because of reflection time. You start taking longer walks in the inner gardens, sometimes without attendance, just you and the faint chirping of imperial sparrows. One fringe report from the time claims you spent 3 full hours lying on your back in the chrysanthemum field watching clouds and categorizing them into faces of past ministers. This cannot be confirmed, but it feels plausible. It's not laziness exactly. You're just tired. Tired of the constant performance, of the marble halls echoing with ceremony, of the tight collar of obligation. You want space. Not the metaphorical kind, the real kind. So, you build it. You commission new palace retreats, not for politics, not for court business, just for solitude. The most famous becomes your favorite, the Western Pavilion, an ornate compound filled with painted screens, bamboo groves, and winding paths that lead absolutely nowhere. You adore it. It's peaceful, it's pretty, and it's perfectly disconnected. The officials notice. They worry. Whispers begin. The emperor is withdrawing. He avoids court. He rules from behind screens. One minister proposes a reform to limit imperial retreats. He's quickly reassigned to flood inspection duty in the dampest province available. Still, you don't vanish. Not completely. You continue to sign edicts. You still promote officials and dispatch military orders. But increasingly, you do it through written instruction, slips of silk sent from secluded chambers. They call it Pailu, the secret imperial rescripts. These start small, minor decisions, ceremonial matters. But soon, they expand to cover everything. And now, your courtiers don't wait for you in person. They wait for messages. You become a voice behind a curtain, a brushstroke on paper. You are present, and yet never seen. Your daily rhythm becomes dreamlike. Mornings in soft robes, reading poetry, inspecting odd curiosities. A silver peach pit, a scroll painted entirely with the left hand, a clock that ticks backward. You're building your own little empire within the empire. Not the chaotic one of armies and ministers, but a quiet world of ritual and retreat. Some say this was when the Ming bureaucracy began to stiffen. Without a visible, engaged emperor, ministers began playing their own power games. Censorites filled with petty vendettas. Tax collectors turned forgetful. One governor, accidentally, recorded 12,000 phantom laborers. When questioned, he blamed a misaligned abacus. The joke around court becomes, the emperor sleeps, so we dream freely. But you? You see all of it. You're no fool. You know what's slipping. But you weigh it against your sanity and pick sleep. Not literal sleep, mind you, philosophical rest. You deserve that much. Besides, the realm still stands. Roads still hum with carts. Temples still burn incense. It's just less efficient. A little more corrupt. A little more improvisational. You begin to rule not like a captain steering a ship, but like a distant lighthouse, glowing, unmoving, offering guidance but letting everyone else figure out the tides. There's a peculiar debate among historians about this era. Was it a slow decline masked by ceremonial glitter? Or was it a conscious philosophical pivot? Your choice to remove imperial ego from daily governance, trusting the bureaucracy to self-regulate. Neither side agrees. One scholar even wrote that you were the most effective absentee ruler in dynastic history. That's either a compliment or a highly specific insult. And through it all, you remain supremely unbothered. You host garden banquets with dancers dressed as phoenixes. You approve palace opera performances where the hero is a teacup that gains sentience. You compose lazy poetry that always begins with, I awoke in silk. You continue collecting tiny furniture. There's a rumor that you once hosted a 24-hour contest for the most uselessly beautiful object. The winner was a golden fan carved with the sound of wind, even though fans by nature make wind. You keep it near your bed. You still hold court a few times a year. Grand sessions, filled with all the necessary robes and ritual. And when you appear, the court is stunned all over again by your presence. You speak little, but when you do, it's measured, precise, and always slightly disappointing to the people who hoped you'd be either furious or dead. By now, you've become something of a mystery. Ministers fear invoking your name, not because of wrath, but because they're unsure if you're paying attention. Sometimes you are, sometimes you aren't, and that's exactly how you like it. Because here's the secret they never understood. Not every emperor wants to conquer. Some just want peace, and a cup of tea, and maybe a calligraphy brush made from goose feathers. You're still ruling, just differently. More quietly. Like a distant constellation everyone swears is guiding them, even if they haven't actually looked up in years. And the empire? For now, it still turns. There's a moment, somewhere in your third decade as emperor, when you start measuring time not by years, but by the number of festivals you've chosen to skip. The Lantern Festival? Too smoky. Dragon boat races? Too splashy. That ritual where ministers recite poems to the moon while standing on one leg? You politely decline with a handwritten note that simply says, "May the moon not judge my absence." What matters now isn't being seen. It's being known. On your own terms, from behind walls painted with cranes and clouds. You begin to perfect the art of deliberate invisibility. And the more you retreat, the more mythic you become. You rule, but through proxies. Layers upon layers of them. Officials submit petitions which are read by eunuchs, summarized for senior ministers, then condensed again before reaching your ever-distant hands. It's like a bureaucratic version of telephone, and the final decisions often sound just a little off. A request for irrigation funding turns into an edict about flood poetry contests. You approve it anyway. This system, so strange, so indirect, becomes normal. Ministers start phrasing petitions like riddles, hoping to appeal to your elusive tastes. One simply writes, "The fish in the southern lake swim tiredly, longing for royal clarity." You send back a scroll that says, "Let the fish rest then." The lake is dredged. Somehow, everyone's satisfied. Historians still argue whether this peculiar administrative style was brilliant delegation or complete abdication. On paper, everything continues. Taxes collected, repairs ordered, armies rotated. But the hands actually pushing the levers? Not yours. Not really. Still, your hand is never far. You keep certain strings for yourself. The Grand Secretariat, the highest body of advisors, answers directly to you. You shuffle its members with quiet precision, favoring those who write good poetry or have tasteful calligraphy. One minister with chicken scratch handwriting is demoted so gently he thinks it's a promotion. But the real force behind the curtain now? The eunuchs. Yes, the same men once charged with guarding your door and brewing your tea are now couriering royal edicts, enforcing court etiquette, and even whispering advice into the ears of provincial inspectors. They form what you call your inner cabinet, a team of loyal, mostly literate, always attentive listeners who exist entirely within your bubble. It's unconventional, shocking even. In past dynasties, eunuchs meddling in politics usually meant doom. But you? You see them as perfect agents, politically unambitious, utterly dependent on the court, and best of all, discreet. One of them, a wiry man named Feng Bao, becomes your unofficial voice in external affairs. He's witty, deeply loyal, and can deliver a rebuke in 5 words or fewer. Some officials protest his growing influence. Those protests mysteriously vanish, or get rescheduled for never. There's a fringe theory, unproven of course, that Feng once decided a military promotion based on a soldier's ability to recite lines from an opera about talking pandas. Whether or not it's true, the soldier was promoted, and the opera became wildly popular in border provinces. Meanwhile, the empire ticks along. Slowly, unevenly, but still ticking. The northern border sees skirmishes with Mongol tribes, but nothing explosive. Trade caravans continue rumbling along the Silk Road, though fewer officials bother inspecting the goods. Pirates raid southern coasts now and then, but only when it's not monsoon season. And in the heart of it all, you sit behind ornate screens, sipping ginger tea and reviewing silk-penned reports while someone plucks a zither nearby. You've created your own rhythm, a meditative, slow-paced governance style that values distance over presence, symbolism over speeches. You develop a curious obsession with timepieces. Sundials, water clocks, an intricate contraption sent from a Portuguese merchant that chimes every hour on the hour, which you find incredibly annoying at night but refuse to part with. You place it in a separate chamber and listen to it from across a courtyard, close enough to remind you that time is passing, far enough not to disturb your sleep. This is also the era of foreign contact. Sort of. You don't personally receive any foreign envoys. You haven't received anyone in years. But you allow reports to reach you. The Portuguese keep asking for more trade access. The Spanish too. And then there's the curious arrival of Christian missionaries, one of whom claims he can turn wine into godliness. You raise an eyebrow and tell your eunuchs to give him an empty cup and see what happens. It doesn't, but you permit them to stay because you find their maps fascinating. So many coastlines, so many names that sound like sneezes. You keep one of their globes in your study, even though the South Pole is incorrectly labeled as unknown snow monster. It adds character. Despite your withdrawal from the public eye, the empire isn't crumbling. Not yet. That's the strangest part. Ministers still squabble, taxes still get collected, temples still ring their bells on time. It's as if your absence has forced everyone else to appear more present. A paradox in action. You once compare your governance style to the moon's reflection in a pond. Unseen yet visible, distant yet full of light. Your ministers just nod. One later confesses to another, "I have no idea what that means, but it sounded incredibly wise." And slowly, the myth of you grows. The silent emperor, the ghost on the throne. Some call you Wanli the Withdrawn. Others, Wanli the Wise, though usually with a question mark. Foreign envoys send gifts into the palace with no expectation of ever meeting you. They assume the emperor is some divine mystery, and honestly, you're fine with that. You receive a lacquered music box from a Korean envoy, and when it plays, it sounds like the melody of falling rain. You keep it on your desk and use it to time your midday naps. Meanwhile, your son grows up somewhere in the palace. He's healthy, curious, and almost alarmingly punctual. You don't see him much, not because you don't care, but because too much closeness feels like a disruption. You remember what happened with Zhang. You know what it means to be managed. Instead, you send him notes, riddles, small puzzles, warnings disguised as jokes. He responds with sketches of dragons playing chess. It's not exactly a Hallmark relationship, but it's yours. You've stopped trying to explain yourself. If the world wants an absent emperor, let them make one up. You're busy enjoying your slow empire, where decisions come like seasons, rarely rushed, always deliberate, and sometimes entirely aesthetic. Besides, ruling from a distance has its perks. You get the mystery, the control, the silence. And every now and then, you approve something grand, like a new observatory or an irrigation canal, just to remind everyone that yes, the emperor still exists. He's just resting his eyes. And then comes the sun issue. Not a sun, mind you. The sun. The one you've chosen. The one you want. The one you expect to follow you through eternity like a celestial reflection in a lotus pond. He's not the firstborn. Now, before you judge, understand. Your first son, born to the Empress, is perfectly adequate. Good posture, decent poetry, hasn't broken anything important. But you don't feel it. That spark, that weighty sense of fate. Instead, your heart is set on another, your third son, born to noble consort Zheng, your longtime favorite. Why? Who knows? Maybe it's his wit. Maybe it's his smile. Maybe it's because he once called a painted parrot Minister of Feathers and saluted it. You adore him. You want him to be crown prince. Except, oh dear, that's not how things work. In Confucian tradition, the first son of the empress gets the nod. It's not optional. It's not open to interpretation. It's inked into the ritual bones of dynasty itself. And yet here you are, ready to upend centuries of precedent for love, for loyalty. Or maybe just to prove that after all these years, you can still cause a stir. Historians still argue whether this was a sincere act of paternal devotion or a spectacular display of imperial stubbornness. Some say you were testing the system. Others say you were playing palace chess, 3 moves ahead. Either way, the results were sticky. You stall for years. You don't name anyone crown prince. You let time hang heavy like a brocade curtain in midsummer. Ministers gather in groups, whispering, waiting. Some petition daily. Name the heir, your majesty, for the good of the realm. You send back a peach pit carved with the character for later. It's a weird time, because for all your silence, your preferences are obvious. You promote consort Zheng's relatives. You give your third son better tutors, better toys, better robes. You let him ride a white horse through the southern gardens, while the firstborn gets a nice set of scrolls about filial piety. Subtle, right? Tensions rise. The court divides. Pro-empress versus pro-consort factions develop like competing opera troupes. Officials start hiding their real opinions behind layers of polite metaphor. One memo praises the sun rising in the east, a clear pro-firstborn jab. Another replies with, but the western breeze brings the sweeter plum. Team Zheng. And you? You pretend not to notice. You say you're still considering. You say you're meditating on cosmic omens. You say you're waiting for divine dreams to guide you. One fringe report claims you bought 30 pillows stuffed with peacock feathers to enhance spiritual clarity. It's probably not true, but it feels plausible. Meanwhile, the empire starts twitching, without a named heir. Governors get nervous. Soldiers get restless. Foreign emissaries keep asking awkward questions like, who's next? One even draws a diagram of succession lines and leaves it accidentally on a minister's table. You do not respond. The empress, quiet but firm, waits. She never publicly complains. She never raises her voice. But every time she walks past the hall of succession, the floorboards seem to creak a little louder. And still, you stall. You give yourself small excuses. A flood in the south, a drought in the north, a poetic craving that requires your full attention. One week, you become obsessed with miniature bonsai landscapes. mountains, rivers, tiny scholars carved from ivory. You say each must represent an ideal world before you can name the heir. Ministers begin quoting gardening manuals in their petitions. Years pass. It gets weirder. You hold informal poetry contests in the palace where the theme is proper succession. One minister wins with a haiku that ends, "Firstborn holds the sun, thirdborn plays with phoenix bones, sky sighs quietly." He's promoted. No one is sure why. Eventually, the pressure builds to volcanic levels. Your refusal to declare a crown prince becomes a symbol of your whole reign. Beautiful, aloof, vaguely frustrating. One historian even calls it a passive-aggressive masterclass in dynastic inertia. Finally, after a solid 30 years of dodging the question, you yield. You name your firstborn as the official heir. There's no speech, no ceremony, just a quiet decree, carried through the silk channels and confirmed with a red seal that smells faintly of lotus oil. You don't explain. You don't have to. It's done. The court exhales. Candles are lit. Bells are rung. Ministers pretend they always knew it would end this way. Some throw discreet parties involving dumplings shaped like imperial seals. Peace of a sort returns. But not entirely. You don't really speak to the empress. You see her during ceremonies from across the golden screen. She bows. You nod. That's it. And consort Zheng? You still keep her close. Still visit her private garden. Still commission paintings of her favorite hawk. But you stop talking about the future. That door is closed now. Your third son, the one you'd hoped to raise into something more, takes the news with quiet dignity. He becomes a calligraphy enthusiast. He stops riding the white horse. He starts quoting Confucius with painful accuracy. You suspect he's trying to become boring on purpose. And as for your firstborn, now the crown prince, he does his duty. He studies, he bows, he waits, always with perfect posture. You can't help but feel a little sad about it. Not because you made the wrong choice, but because any choice, after that much delay, feels like surrender. You retreat even further. Your court becomes a world of reflection pools, faint flute music, and perfumed ink. You read strange philosophical treatises about mountains that dream of walking. You commission an entire opera where the emperor is replaced by a mirror. You keep a garden turtle and name it Patience. And the empire? It keeps spinning, just a little slower, just a little fuzzier around the edges. Because naming an heir was never really about naming an heir, it was about facing the future. And if there's one thing you've always preferred to face only in profile, it's that. But now the line of succession is stable. Sort of. You've checked that box. The ministers are appeased. And you? You go back to your bonsai mountains. Maybe today's one will have a tiny waterfall. The seasons drift by, lazily now, like petals in a pond. You lose track of which day is which. Not because your mind is slipping, but because the court's rhythms no longer concern you the way they once did. You've mastered the rare skill of disengagement without collapse. It's not neglect exactly. More like selective attention, the imperial version of out of office with no return date. By now, the court mostly runs itself, or tries to. Grand secretaries draft proposals. Eunuchs relay your occasional nods or cryptic remarks. Occasionally, someone slips a bold reform idea under your tea tray. You once approve an entire tax code revision simply because the calligraphy reminded you of plum blossoms. There's one reformer, Zhang Zhuzhang, remember him? That sharp-minded, sharp-shouldered man who once kept the empire in impeccable alignment. He's long gone now, passed into bureaucratic legend. But his legacy remains. His policies, fiscal tightening, grain storage improvements, forced audits, still ripple through the government, though they've begun to unravel like an old tapestry. Without his steady hand, things fray. Corruption, once fearful of his shadow, begins to peek out again, shy at first, then bolder. Historians still argue whether your decision to let Zhang's reforms die a slow, polite death was passive sabotage or simply the result of boredom. Either way, you don't lift a brush to stop it. Meanwhile, the eunuchs are thriving. Their influence has grown so gradually that even the paintings in the palace now feature them more prominently than ministers. One anonymous scroll shows a eunuch presenting an imperial seal, while a Confucian scholar kneels with a confused expression. It's definitely political satire, but so beautifully rendered that you hang it in your library. The line between palace staff and imperial authority has blurred. Eunuchs conduct inspections, oversee tax collection, and even make minor military decisions in your name. Feng Bao, the ever-useful court whisperer, retires with honors and is replaced by a younger, more mysterious figure named Wei Zhongxian. More on him later. You start to notice something odd. Petitions coming to you smell faintly of incense. Not the official kind, but a personal blend. A hint of sandalwood and anxiety. Ministers are trying to scent their appeals to win favor. One petition arrives folded into an origami lotus. It's ignored. Another comes shaped like a dragon. That one gets accidentally burned. At night, you walk your private garden paths alone. The stones are arranged in spiral patterns meant to stimulate cosmic harmony. Sometimes you recite poetry to the koi. They do not respond. Still, it feels important. You've also taken up an odd little hobby, cataloging clouds. Every morning, you sit by the east-facing window and sketch the clouds above the Forbidden City. You give them names. Wandering Scholar, Grumpy General, Turtle that Regrets. Sometimes they resemble people you know. Sometimes they're just clouds. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're watching them, and no one else knows what you see. Meanwhile, further from the palace, trouble stirs. The military, already thinned by years of neglected drills and budget cuts, starts showing signs of disorder. Northern garrisons complain of low pay and stale rations. Some soldiers reportedly train with wooden spears because the real ones are missing, likely sold off by some enterprising logistics officer with a talent for disappearing. You hear about this, of course. But the report is delivered by a eunuch dressed in embroidered robes who compares the situation to a play. Act 1, Unfed Heroes. Act 2, General Confusion. You chuckle. Then you forget. There's also that awkward business with Korea. The Japanese, under a warlord with excellent hair and terrible manners named Toyotomi Hideyoshi, invade the Korean peninsula. Korea pleads for help. As the empire that theoretically oversees Korea as a tributary, China must respond. So you do, eventually. You approve a military campaign, led by Ming generals, to drive the Japanese back. The war drags on. Victories are inconsistent. The terrain is muddy, the morale muddier. The costs balloon like a dumpling left too long in a steamer. You see the ledgers. You raise one eyebrow, then go back to rearranging your inkstones. Still, the Korean campaign becomes one of the last notable foreign interventions of your reign. It's like someone nudging you out of sleep to say, "Hey, just checking. You still the emperor?" You blink once and go back to dreaming. Back at home, unrest bubbles quietly. Peasant revolts begin to appear. Not massive, not immediate threats, but frequent enough to be annoying. Many are led by self-proclaimed heavenly princes or incarnate dragons, wearing paper crowns and claiming divine dreams. You approve local crackdowns with barely a glance. One such rebel, whose name translates roughly as Goose Spirit Warrior, gathers several thousand followers before being trampled by a startled yak. The rebellion ends immediately. You make a note in your journal. Fear the yak more than the sword. But the real rot is slow and structural. Roads decay. Regional governors skim more. Temple records start including fictitious donors to cover lost revenue. You once receive a ceremonial gift of jade that turns out to be painted soapstone. It's so well done you keep it anyway. You start to see your reign as a sort of performance art. Stability through stillness. Rule by inertia. If nothing explodes, then you've succeeded. It's the ultimate low-effort governance. A fringe anecdote claims that during a palace fire, when flames approached your quarters, you refused to evacuate until someone retrieved your favorite scroll, a painting of a goose staring at the moon. Whether true or not, the tale spreads, adding another feather to your myth. You are no longer just the emperor. You're a concept. Students study your silences like scripture. Officials interpret your pauses as policy. A school of political philosophy emerges called still water governance. Their central tenet? The more you do nothing, the less goes wrong. You would find this hilarious if you still laughed aloud. But it works, or at least it doesn't fail, not yet. Your name is still spoken in rituals. Your birthday is still celebrated with lanterns and dumplings shaped like dragons. No one says it out loud, but everyone's wondering, how long can this possibly last? And you, sitting behind your silk screen, listening to the wind in the bamboo, might answer, as long as I want it to. You wake, if you can call it that, to the quiet clatter of ceremonial spoons. Somewhere out in the outer courtyard, another minor prince is being given a silk sash and a title he doesn't understand. Grand Steward of River Reflections, or something equally prestigious and entirely pointless. The court has become a factory for titles. There are more honorifics than there are useful jobs. Vice Inspector of Auspicious Grain, Deputy Commissioner of Moonlight Rituals. It's bureaucratic origami, folded and folded until meaning disappears. And in this swirl of flattering nonsense, the eunuchs continue their quiet climb. Remember Wei Chongxian? Tallish, whispery, with the remarkable ability to disappear from a conversation mid-sentence? He's been climbing the imperial ladder rung by silk-covered rung, smiling just enough to seem agreeable. Never so much that you notice him too much. You do notice him now. He's everywhere. Not by force, but by default. You ask for tea? He brings it, and somehow you start talking about flood management. You want music for a rainy evening? He arranges a zither trio and slips in a report about tax evasion in the eastern provinces. It's subtle, this domination. Historians still argue whether you orchestrated his rise or simply allowed it because he was so wonderfully non-disruptive. He has that essential quality you adore in a courtier. He never insists. He just offers, like a shadow that falls exactly where it's needed. Under Wei Zhongxian's guidance, the eunuch administration becomes a parallel government. They're efficient, if a little overly fond of gilded things. Documents arrive with more tassels. Decrees are perfumed. The imperial paper budget quadruples. And the scholars? The civil officials who pass the arduous exams and memorize every Confucian virtue? They're not thrilled. They see Wei and his kind as imposters. Men without names, without family lines, holding power once reserved for pedigree and poetry. They write letters. They hold whispery meetings under lotus awnings. They petition, repeatedly, passionately. You skim the petitions, nod vaguely, and move on. Once one brave minister publicly accuses Wei of corruption. You say nothing. The man is demoted to supervisor of goat records. Not even goats, just their records. You don't laugh, but you do request goat stew that evening. Meanwhile, the palace grows stranger. It's like a dream you half remember. Gold-leafed everything, corridors lined with mirrors that reflect not you, but the idea of you. Eunuchs glide down the halls like they're on invisible rails. Music plays with no visible musicians. A few new ministers begin bowing slightly when entering empty rooms, just in case you're nearby. And you? You begin retreating from even your own throne room. There's a new chamber you've taken to, deep within the inner court, hidden behind 7 lacquered screens. It smells of cedar and ink, and the windows are painted shut. You call it the Room of No Decisions. No one enters unless summoned. You are rarely summoned. From this room you begin issuing what historians will later call your ghost edicts. Orders signed in your name with your seal but delivered by eunuchs, composed by eunuchs, and, some whisper, invented by eunuchs. Do you notice? Of course. Do you care? Not really. By now, the system has become self-sustaining. The wheel turns, greased by protocol and incense. You simply keep the idea of the emperor alive, like a lantern whose flame never flickers, but only because no one dares breathe near it. Some days you write poetry. Some days you just sit in your silent room, rearranging your inkstones by weight and mood. Once, you spend 3 days deciding whether plum-colored dusk better describes your current mental state or your new robe. Important decisions? They still come. But they arrive wrapped in ceremony so elaborate they barely register as choices. A province floods. You approve aid. A governor offends a Mongol envoy. You express measured disappointment. Bandits sack a town in the south. You send an opera troupe to cheer the survivors. One day, an official bursts into your silence. Truly bursts, disheveled, trembling, robes half undone. He falls to his knees and begs you to act, to rule, to come back into the daylight. He quotes ancient emperors. He weeps. You ask if he has brought any fruit. He has not. He is removed. But here's the twist. The empire still stands. Like a great, groaning, celestial beast, the Ming bureaucracy continues. Peasants sow and reap. Taxes flow, though slower. Temples chant. Bells ring. Trade caravans cross the borders. Occasionally, someone slaps your portrait onto a coin and claims progress. Because while you rule less and less, your absence becomes a kind of rule. You are Schrodinger's emperor, both present and not, decisive and indifferent, revered and resented. Foreign envoys come to court, bow deeply, and leave without ever seeing you. They describe the sound of the emperor behind the screen, as if it were a real phenomenon. One even writes a poem about it. The silence was louder than a cannon's cry. You like that one. You keep it by your bed. And Wei Zhongxian? He grows bold. Not arrogant, he's too careful for that, but bold in the way fog creeps into every crevice. He reorganizes the treasury. He builds temples to his ancestors. He establishes a eunuch academy, complete with uniforms and a motto. Service is silence. He also quietly removes rivals. Scholar officials who question him find themselves relocated, demoted, or very politely vanished. Rumors begin that he has a private garden of rock sculptures made in the likeness of dismissed ministers. You don't ask. You could stop him, maybe. But then again, he's handling things. Sort of. The empire isn't worse necessarily, just stranger, more theatrical, less grounded, like a dream slowly drifting toward abstraction. Your world has narrowed. You live in candlelight and soft sandals, in whispered updates and half-remembered oaths. You are surrounded by cushions, both literal and political. There is nothing sharp left. One day, during a spring rain, you look out through a bamboo blind and see a cat asleep in a teacup. It doesn't wake. You whisper, "That looks peaceful?" No one hears. You like it that way. So here you are, not quite gone, not quite present, not quite ruling, not quite irrelevant. The emperor is still in his palace, but only just. It's getting harder now to remember how long you've been in this palace. Not just as the emperor, but as a man. As someone who once climbed stairs 2 at a time, who laughed too loudly at court plays, who scribbled silly nicknames in the margins of edicts. That person is still somewhere in here, tucked beneath layers of brocade and ritual, but he surfaces less and less. Most days, you feel more like a ghost haunting your own dynasty. There's still news, of course. It arrives in scrolls, in whispers, in dreams you half remember upon waking. Most of it is repetitive. Flood, famine, minor rebellion, drought, grain shortages, dikes collapsing, temples requesting subsidies, more bandits, more eunuch promotions. Historians still argue whether you actually read these dispatches or just skimmed for the amusing calligraphy. Your marginalia suggests a little of both. On a report about locusts in Hebei, you simply write, "annoying." Another about tax riots in Sichuan receives a doodle of a bored chicken. Some would call it apathy. Others, a kind of minimalism. But here's the quiet truth. You've begun to fear making choices. Not because you lack authority, but because after so long, every choice feels dangerously final. You've built a reign on inaction so thoroughly that even a simple order to rebuild a wall now feels like shaking the earth. So instead, you wait. And wait. Meanwhile, your court becomes a parody of itself. Confucian scholars, once the bedrock of imperial wisdom, are now half-curtain ornaments. They perform ethics like a stage troupe, bowing at the right angle, quoting Mencius on cue, but knowing full well their words drift past your silk screens unheard. Some still try, scribbling earnest memorials late into the night, hoping one might break through. One nearly does. A young official named Yang Lian sends a fiery memorial denouncing Wei Zhongxian. He calls him corrupt, manipulative, a disgrace to the dynasty. He lists accusations, embezzlement, nepotism, even sorcery. The language is so florid, it singes the paper. You read it, all of it. You fold it carefully, then you ask Wei if he's had lunch. Yang Lian is arrested, then exiled, then rearrested. Eventually he dies in prison under unfortunate circumstances. You say nothing. The silence echoes. Wei Zhongxian, now fully unshackled, begins reshaping the court in his image. His influence reaches provincial posts, military commands, even the Imperial Examination Board. He builds a temple to himself near Nanjing, complete with golden statues and incense thicker than soup. You don't visit, but you don't forbid it either. The public catches wind. Whispers start about the two emperors, one behind the screen, one behind the throne. Wei becomes a living rumor, a man so powerful he doesn't need to be seen. Some villagers leave offerings at his family tomb just in case it brings better harvests. And still, the empire spins. Grain moves. Taxes trickle. Ports hum quietly with trade, though foreign ships now outnumber Chinese ones. Portuguese merchants, reeking of tobacco and sea salt, barter trinkets for silks. Jesuit missionaries arrive, armed with telescopes and flawless calligraphy. One, Matteo Ricci, impresses the court so thoroughly he's allowed to live in Beijing and debate philosophy with officials, mostly about whether heaven is circular or square. You find it funny. Heaven may be round, but your patience is not. So, you stay in your palace. You eat lotus cakes and pickled dates. You avoid birthdays. You forget festivals. You hear fireworks in the distance and think they sound tired. The capital itself begins to change. Beijing is still grand, but its bones creak. Streets fill with petitioners, bridges sag, markets swell with imported goods, but the local coin feels thinner. Bandits no longer hide in hills. They organize, write manifestos, stage polite revolts, and then vanish. Some even quote Confucius while burning tax offices. You ask a eunuch to prepare a statement. He returns with a brief but confident response. Local issues being handled. You nod and return to your cloud sketches. A fringe detail begins to circulate. That you no longer see the sun. That you live entirely by candlelight, your skin pale as rice paper, your eyes permanently squinting. Another tale claims your voice has grown so soft that only trained birds can detect it. These rumors, you admit, are not entirely unpleasant. It's peaceful in the palace. One day, a painter is summoned to immortalize your likeness. He waits outside the room of no decisions for 7 days. You finally agree, on the condition he paints you only from memory. The resulting portrait shows an emperor who could be you, or a dream someone once had about you. You hang it anyway. Later, a fire breaks out in the Hall of Literary Brilliance. Dozens of scrolls are lost, including one describing a rare comet from the previous century. You sigh. Another eunuch rushes in with a replacement scroll, a poem about ducks. You approve it for archiving. That same month, your favorite garden path collapses into a sinkhole. You take it as a sign. Still, you do not change course. If your reign had a motto, it might be, let it pass. Let the protests pass. Let the petitions pass. Let the eunuchs pass. Let the scholars bow and whisper and go. Let the rains fall and the rivers overflow. Let the seasons shuffle by like bored dancers. And as this endless, passive governance unspools into the final decades, something strange begins to take root. People adapt. Governors start solving problems without waiting for approval. Local temples begin managing drought relief. Merchants form protective alliances. Even border generals stop asking permission and start doing what needs to be done. The empire doesn't thrive, but it doesn't fall, not yet. Because even without your daily attention, the Ming machine, creaky, inconsistent, endlessly ceremonial, has momentum. The same bureaucracy that once trapped you now traps, collapse itself. It stalls everything, including disaster. And maybe, just maybe, that's your final trick. You didn't rule with vision, or reform, or passion. But through absence, you let the system show what it was made of. The court, the ministers, the eunuchs, the villagers, the merchants, they all carried on because you didn't stop them. You are a living paradox, the emperor who ruled by vanishing. And in a world where action so often leads to chaos, maybe that was wise. Or maybe, historians still argue, it was just incredibly lucky. Either way, the empire continues. And you? You are still here, behind the screen, watching. Or maybe just dreaming. There's a saying now among lower officials, passed quietly over tea. When the emperor sleeps, the empire holds its breath. Some say it with bitterness, others with genuine reverence. Most just say it because, well, it's true. You sleep. A lot. And not always in the literal sense. You drift in and out of days like a leaf caught on the still surface of a pond. Meals appear and disappear. Reports arrive and are carried off unopened. Music plays faintly from unseen corners. Occasionally, a bird lands on your window. You don't move. It eventually leaves, unimpressed. Your world has shrunk again. This time not just to the palace, but to a handful of rooms. The room of no decisions, your sleeping chamber, the incense library, and that one hallway where the sun filters through red glass in the afternoons. Your favorite hour, when everything feels like it's been dipped in plum wine. Even Wei Zhongxian visits less often now. He doesn't need to. His systems are in place. His men are everywhere. The temples he's built to himself now outshine most of the imperial shrines. Some even host puppet shows of your coronation, with him discreetly looming in the background as noble servant number one. You know this. You've heard the reports. You've even chuckled once or twice. But do you intervene? Of course not. Historians still argue whether this was resignation, strategy, or pure exhaustion. Most agree it was probably a complicated cocktail of all three, with a splash of laziness and a twist of cosmic irony. Because while Wei thrives in the spotlight, your absence begins to acquire a kind of mystique. To the people, you become not an emperor, but a symbol. Not a man, but a metaphor. The silent dragon, the still star. Tales spread of your wisdom, how you choose not to speak because words corrupt. How you rule through restraint. How you meditate for days and emerge with visions of the future. You let them believe this. Why not? It's better than the truth. That some days you spend 2 hours rearranging your jade collection by temperature. Still, the empire, strangely miraculously, persists. New crops are introduced. Sweet potatoes, imported from distant lands, start to appear in southern markets. They grow fast, feed many, and don't mind poor soil. Peasants praise this earth fruit. You nod approvingly, mostly because you like the name. Foreign ships increase. The Portuguese are annoying, the Dutch aggressive, the English confusing, and the Spanish too polite to trust. You approve vague guidelines on trade. Let the eunuchs sort out the details. They always do. One morning, you receive a strange gift. A small glass globe filled with swirling blue ink, brought by a missionary from the West. "It's the world," he says proudly. You stare at it. "It's small," you murmur. He assures you it only looks that way. You ask if it spins. It does. You're delighted. You keep it on your desk, occasionally giving it a gentle flick, watching the continents blur. You tell no one about it. Meanwhile, the court becomes more dreamlike. Officials hold meetings with empty thrones. They recite formal greetings into silence. Eunuchs deliver edicts in voices eerily similar to yours. The difference is subtle, but unmistakable. Someone once sneezes mid-proclamation and is demoted on the spot. Art flourishes. Perhaps because no one's watching too closely. Painters depict enormous mountain ranges shaped like sleeping animals. Poets write lines like, "The plum blossom forgets to bloom and the emperor forgets to rule." Even operas turn experimental. One memorable performance involves 3 hours of silence, broken only by the sound of a falling teacup. You approve the script personally. Amid all this, the Ming dynasty begins to show its seams. Local magistrates hoard taxes. Military commanders forget their duties, then remember them all at once, usually at the worst possible time. Pirate raids increase along the coast, though the pirates now wear official uniforms and collect fees instead of treasure. Rebellions flicker and sputter in the provinces, not major ones yet, just brush fires of discontent. A tax riot here. A collapsed dam there. A village that declares itself independent for a week, then apologizes profusely when no one notices. You do notice, but you let them be, because here's the quiet magic of your reign. The less you do, the more everyone else does. Not always well, not always fairly, but with energy. It's like a table set with food, but no host. People hesitate, then they dig in. One governor starts minting his own coins. Another raises a private militia. A few even attempt reforms, small, local, experimental. Some fail. A few actually work. You receive reports, you blink at them. Sometimes you even smile. You're not just absent, you're an empty canvas, a mirror. People see in you what they want to believe, and so they act, thinking it's in your name. It's not, of course. It's just easier that way. There's an open question historians still ponder. Did you realize how fragile things were becoming? That the patchwork governance, the whispered decisions, the performances of power, were all thin fabric stretched too tight over a dynasty grown old? Maybe you did. Maybe that's why you started writing again. Small things at first, notes to yourself, half-finished poems, a list titled, Things I Might Have Done If I'd Cared More. It's a surprisingly long list. One entry simply reads, Speak to my son. Ah, yes, your son. He's not a boy anymore. Not even close. A man in his 30s now, with a mustache thicker than most advisors' scrolls. You haven't spoken to him in, well, no one's quite sure. A decade? 2? You think of him sometimes, late at night, when the candles gutter and the rain sounds like someone sweeping the sky. You wonder what kind of emperor he'd be, whether he's learned from your example or taken it too closely to heart. You almost write to him once, almost. Instead, you watch the rain, because if there's one thing your rain has taught you, it's that silence is safer than speech. Stillness is harder to blame. And yet, even now, even here, deep in your silent court with its ghostly music and incense-thick air, there's movement, small shifts, quiet revolutions. The world, it seems, refuses to stop spinning, even if you do. The year turns, then turns again. You stop counting them. Birthdays come and go unmarked. The stars shift overhead, but you rarely look up anymore. The stars are busy, and you are not. Inside the palace, the air grows thicker. Not metaphorically, literally. The incense never stops burning. The candles are scented now, imported from far-off isles, each one promising calm or focus or imperial harmony. The last one just made you sneeze. Still, you sit quietly as the empire hums outside your walls, louder than it should for a dynasty this old. You feel the creaks of it in the silence between footsteps. You see the threads fraying, not snapping, but pulling loose in slow spirals. The countryside is restless. Small peasant revolts are becoming less apologetic. They don't fizzle anymore. They shift, reorganize, recruit. One of the more peculiar rebellions involves a man who claims to be the reincarnation of a Ming prince. He wears a paper crown and speaks in rhyme. He leads a band of 500 farmers, all wearing red sashes and calling themselves the Crimson Silence. When captured, he insists he speaks for the hidden emperor. No one's quite sure if he means you or someone else. You don't comment. Historians still argue whether you found this disturbing or mildly flattering. Meanwhile, your court transforms further. There are barely any original faces left. Everyone is someone's nephew or cousin or eager protege. Titles multiply like rabbits. Assistant Vice Minister of Autumn Taxes, Junior Inspector of Ritual Candle Wax. No one wants real power. Just the echo of proximity. Even Wei Zhongxian, your shadow chancellor, seems tired. Not publicly, of course. Outwardly, he remains magnificent. His robes shimmer. His scrolls unfurl like stage curtains. He bows with perfect angles. But the edge is softening. He's built an empire within your empire, but empires exhaust their creators too. One afternoon, you ask for him. A eunuch blinks. He's visiting his ancestral shrine, Your Majesty. You don't ask where that is. You just nod and go back to feeding pomegranate seeds to a squirrel that's taken up residence on your balcony. You call him Minister Nutface. He seems more loyal than most of your actual ministers. Another detail that drifts in. The treasury is looking thin. Not gone, not empty, but noticeably lean around the ribs. Silver flows out faster than it flows in. Trade with the Spanish and Portuguese brings in coin, but the court's spending matches it beat for beat. On silk, on temples, on parades, on extremely unnecessary golden boats. You approve fewer and fewer expenditures, and the court responds by inventing creative workarounds. A garden enhancement grant becomes a loophole for remodeling an entire summer palace. A flood preparedness fund buys matching robes for a local opera troupe. Somewhere, someone uses disaster relief to commission a commemorative lantern shaped like your face. You're not even mad, it's a good likeness. You find yourself amused, more than annoyed these days. It's like watching an opera you've seen 100 times. Same plot, different costumes. A minister begs for reform. A eunuch counters with tradition. An envoy arrives bearing tribute from a kingdom that may or may not still exist. A tax riot flares up. A poet writes a mournful ode to falling plum blossoms. Someone sneezes during a ritual and is reassigned to rice storage. And through it all, the empire continues. That's the strange part. It doesn't collapse. Not really. It just limps forward, like an old ox too stubborn to lie down. The people adjust. Merchants form informal guilds. Families create communal grain banks. Villages police themselves. Local temples organize water management. You hear of one town that elects a mayor by chicken fight. Another hires an actor to pretend to be their magistrate because the real one disappeared 3 years ago. You nod at the reports, you sip your tea. It's not apathy anymore, it's something gentler, like acceptance or maybe detachment. Sometimes, in the quiet, you wonder if this is what immortality feels like. Not eternal life, but eternal repetition. The seasons turn. The palace stays the same. New faces deliver old news. You write the same notes in the margins of the same scrolls. One reads, "Should probably ask about that flood. It's 4 years old now." You write it again just in case. And now, after decades of reigning by omission, your son steps closer. He visits the palace more often. Not to speak, he rarely dares, but to walk the gardens. You see him sometimes from a distance, moving with hands behind his back the way you used to. He's heavier, more cautious. But there's a strange fire behind his eyes, a flicker of intent. He leaves you a poem, you don't read it. Not yet. Historians still debate what your relationship was like. Some say cold, others distant, others quietly respectful in the way two mountains are. Always watching, never touching. And now the whispers grow louder. About bandits calling themselves liberators. About provincial armies operating without oversight. About scholars secretly corresponding with each other, building something like a resistance, but more polite. Less torches, more treatises. You know what this means? The stillness is ending. Even you, behind your gauze curtains and silver tea sets, can feel it. The balance you've curated, through absence, silence, withdrawal, is beginning to tremble. Not break, not yet, but shift. Like a porcelain cup just starting to tilt on the edge of a table. You could grab it. You could say something, stand, raise a hand, summon your court, and remind them that the throne still holds a voice. But you don't. You just watch. Because maybe this too is part of your reign. Not failure, not triumph, but surrender. Not out of fear or fatigue, but because, after everything, you trust the machine to roll just a little longer. And maybe, just maybe, you're curious to see what happens next. The squirrel tilts its head. You toss another pomegranate seed. The squirrel doesn't come back the next day. Maybe it found a better balcony, or maybe it was caught up in the web of minor palace intrigues, mistaken for a spy, exiled to the outer gardens. Stranger things have happened in your court. After all, once an attendant was dismissed for humming too cheerfully during a drought. You don't ask, you just notice the quiet. And that's how it begins. Not with thunder or trumpets, but with small absences. The squirrel. A eunuch who used to bring you tea at precisely the same temperature. A scent you can't quite place, missing from the incense. The palace isn't decaying, it's hollowing. Just a little. You remain, of course. So do the rituals. So does the gentle scraping of slippers in the corridors, the constant brushing of silk sleeves against scrolls, the muted clatter of jade on lacquered trays. But the energy beneath it is changing. Everything feels a half step out of sync, like a song slightly off rhythm. There's talk of omens again. A fish caught in a rice field. A goat born with 2 tails. A comet briefly visible over Nanjing, described by a monk as the emperor's sigh made visible. That monk, incidentally, disappears shortly afterward. Voluntarily, they say. Voluntarily into a remote mountain temple. You make no comment, but you do listen. And you notice something even stranger than the omens. Your son is speaking. Not to you, not directly, but he's making gestures. Writing opinions. Attending ceremonies. Correcting officials. The throne has a shadow again. One not cast by you. And the court notices. They start aligning. Not openly, not dramatically. No, this is the Ming dynasty. Drama happens in secret, through sighs and ink strokes. One advisor starts leaving room in his scrolls for additional commentary, in case the crown prince wishes to add his thoughts. Another begins quoting your son in memorials instead of you. You should feel insulted. You don't. You feel relief, and something faintly like guilt. Historians still argue what kind of emperor you were in these final years. Lazy, strategic, paralyzed by trauma, or simply done with pretending that anyone could really steer the juggernaut of empire with a firm hand and a few proclamations. You lean toward the last one, if only because it sounds dignified. You've always liked dignity, even in silence. You sit longer at your window these days, watching the clouds. They look like battleships sometimes, or sleeping dogs. Or, on one memorable afternoon, a perfect replica of your late uncle's nose. You almost call someone over to see it, but stop. Some moments are better left unshared. Occasionally, old reports arrive about places you forgot you ruled. A mining town in Yunnan where someone's declared independence, then sent a message asking if that's allowed. A scholar in Hangzhou publishing a treatise on why governance should be based on lunar cycles and goose migrations. You admire the creativity. Meanwhile, the Forbidden City develops its own weather patterns, whole microclimates. The southern corridors are always warmer. The archive vaults feel like winter even in midsummer. You begin to wonder if you've outlasted nature itself. And beneath it all, the machinery of empire groans forward. The canals still flow. The grain still ships. The censors still censor, though less passionately. Everything continues. But with less clarity, less certainty. Less you. Wei Zhongxian finally returns from his ancestral pilgrimage. He's gaunter, more cautious, his robes stiffer with starch than ever before. He bows longer, speaks slower, praises your wisdom 3 times per sentence. You raise one eyebrow. He notices. You ask, how fares the temple you had built in your own honor? He freezes, then says, it remains well attended, your majesty. You nod. Let it hang in the air, that's enough. He understands. The balance is shifting. Even puppeteers get tangled in their own strings. And somewhere deep in the court, some new force is stirring. Not revolution, yet, but recognition. That maybe silence isn't forever. That maybe, someday soon, someone will speak again. You think about speaking. You even practice it. At night, you say words aloud to your empty chamber. Yes. No. Too expensive. Release him. Summon the ministers. They sound strange in your throat, like foreign coins. The next morning, you say none of them, but your son does, more confidently now. He hosts a banquet for provincial governors. Stiff, awkward, but present. He reviews troops in the north. He makes decisions about taxes. He lets go of 3 minor officials for corruption. Small fish, but symbolic ones. And then he writes you a letter. It's delivered in a box of polished sandalwood, tied with silk. You recognize his seal. You open it slowly. It reads, Father, if silence was your lesson, I have listened. If distance was your protection, I honor it. But the world no longer waits. And I am here. You reread it several times. Then, very carefully, you place it in the drawer with your other private papers, half poems, lists, sketches of strange birds, and you exhale. There's no confrontation, no palace coup, no sudden death, just a quiet transfer, like mist settling from one tree to the next. Your ministers begin treating your son like a regent, though no one uses the word. You let it happen. Why not? The empire's still standing, and you, miraculously, are still sitting. The nights grow cooler, the moon fuller. You dream more often, mostly of rivers. Long ones, winding endlessly, neither upstream nor down. You're always on a boat. You never see who's rowing. And in the silence that follows, you find something you didn't expect. Peace. Because in the end, perhaps this was always your plan, whether you admitted it to yourself or not. To outlast. To endure. To rule not by force or decree, but by letting the world move around you. Not guiding the river, but becoming the stone it curves around. You rise later. You sleep better. The noise of the court feels distant, like a storm beyond the hills. You are still emperor, but now so is someone else. And that, finally, feels right. It's a quiet morning, no parades, no disasters, no tea spillage emergencies. When the latest tribute from the south arrives, you're not expecting it. You're not expecting anything anymore, really. That's the perk of reigning this long. Very little surprises you unless someone lights themselves on fire in the middle of the courtyard, which, to be fair, did happen once. But this is different. They bring you a pineapple. It's squat, spiny, smells like dreams of warm places. Imported from the Philippines via Portuguese traders who still insist on calling you the son of heaven while charging twice the rate for cinnamon. The court gathers to gawk. You don't say anything. You just stare at it for a long time, then order it placed in your private chambers for study. You never eat it. You just like knowing it's there. The pineapple becomes a minor celebrity. Ministers speculate about its symbolism. Poets write sonnets. One bold eunuch paints a portrait of it perched on a tiny throne. You don't laugh, but you think about laughing. Meanwhile, life keeps puddling forward. Your son grows bolder still. He speaks at audiences now, receives foreign envoys, drafts his own responses. You hear his voice in the next room and feel an odd dislocation, like time is folding, and you're hearing your younger self filtered through years of dust. He doesn't ask your permission. You don't give it, and yet everything proceeds. Historians still puzzle over this non-transition transition. Was it planned? Was it a coup wrapped in politeness? Was it a natural shift, like dawn replacing dusk? No one can agree. They dig through palace documents, diaries, gossip written in the margins of weather reports. They find lots of ambiguity, and the occasional pineapple sketch. One scroll notes that you were observed smiling faintly during a garden walk. That's the closest they get to confirmation of approval. You still hold the throne, of course. Technically, formally, but the weight of it has shifted. And now the empire wobbles under a new rhythm. Outside the palace, unrest hums louder. The bandits multiply. Not just in numbers, but in cleverness. They aren't just hungry anymore. They're strategic, coordinated. Some wear stolen uniforms. Some carry forged documents. One group impersonates a tax delegation and collects levies for 6 months before vanishing with the silver and 2 pet cranes. You receive a report detailing the entire affair. You underline the part about the cranes. Inside there's tension too. Wei Zhongxian is losing his grip. Slowly, but undeniably. His allies grow nervous. His temples fall out of favor. One burns mysteriously. Another is converted into a noodle house by a particularly irreverent general. You say nothing, but one afternoon you ask a passing eunuch, "Do you remember where Wei Zhongxian came from?" The eunuch stares. "From the laundry," he says quietly. You nod. So many important people come from the laundry. It's not a threat, it's just an observation. That evening, the chancellor resigns. Citing illness. He leaves behind a sealed document and a very expensive painting of a dragon dancing with a turtle. The symbolism escapes everyone. You don't attend his farewell. Instead, you spend more time in the observatory. The stars still shine, indifferent. The court astrologers speak in riddles. The northern star stares directly at the heart, one whispers. Jupiter has stopped blinking. You suspect they're just bored, or inventing drama because the emperor won't. And then a strange visitor arrives, an old monk. No name, no invitation, just walks in one day during the spring rains and asks for an audience. Normally this wouldn't happen, but the guards let him through. Something about his presence. You hear the footsteps in the hall, slow and steady, as though carried on the beat of time itself. He kneels, doesn't bow, just waits. You ask, "Why are you here?" He answers, "To witness." You don't ask what. He leaves without saying anything else. The court debates his identity for weeks. A prophet? A spy? A figment of collective burnout? Someone paints him into a scroll alongside cranes, moons, and the ever-present pineapple. No one knows why. You hang the scroll in your room. Everything continues. Taxes are collected, then lost. Rebels rise, then disappear. Famines touch the edge of provinces like fingers skimming surface tension. Armies are sent. Sometimes they return, sometimes they just write letters from wherever they end up. The post office has never been busier. And you? You remain. You breathe a little slower. Climb fewer stairs. Stop writing marginalia on documents. You still receive reports, though. Not because you ask, because people think they should. A habit of history. One of the last reports that truly catches your attention describes a school in Anhui province where the students have begun teaching themselves. No masters, no curriculum, just books, questions, and debates under candlelight. They call it the Quiet Academy. You smile. Maybe they'll build something better, or just something different. The empire, for all its creaks and smoke, is still there. Still staggeringly huge. Still absurdly complicated. Still beautiful in the way ancient trees are beautiful. Not because they bloom, but because they've survived. And so have you. Your robes are thinner now. Your fingers tremble slightly. But your mind somehow is clear. Not sharp. Not calculating, just calm. The pineapple begins to rot. No one has the heart to throw it out. It sits on a silver tray, noble in decay. Like a metaphor, no one wants to finish. And one morning, you wake up before the sun. The world outside is fogged in white. You rise slowly. Wrap yourself in an old cloak. Walk through the echoing halls. The throne room is empty, of course, but the cushion still holds your shape. You don't sit. You just stand there, one hand resting on the edge of the seat, and listen. Not to noise, to the lack of it. And in that silence, you hear everything. You start counting things now. Not taxes or edicts, not ministers or memorials. Simpler things. The steps between your sleeping chamber and the balcony. 37. The number of cypress trees you can see from the north wall. 12, though one's really just a very ambitious shrub. The soft clicks a night guard's shoes make during his patrol. 5 per breath. It calms you. No one questions it. If anything, they tread more softly around you. There's a reverence now. Not the forced kind, but something quieter, older. Like monks preserving an ancient drum they'll never play. Your son has effectively taken the reins. Not in name. Not yet. But everyone acts like he has. He signs papers. He makes speeches. He holds audiences. His calligraphy is growing confident, looser, more fluid, even a little arrogant in its curves. You haven't corrected him in months. There's no need. Wei Chongxian fades. Not dramatically. He simply begins showing up less. He loses weight, stops sending gifts. The last time you see him, he's standing very still by a pillar, watching shadows move along the floor as if they might whisper something useful. He bows, wordlessly, and leaves the way all powerful men hope to, with the illusion that it was their choice. No one replaces him, and somehow the world doesn't end. Historians still debate what finally broke his grip. Public backlash, court fatigue, divine karma, or your son's quiet rise, probably a blend. History rarely serves things in neat bowls. The eunuchs return to their quieter duties. Dusting scrolls, arranging wardrobes, fetching warm towels, occasionally singing little songs that you half remember from childhood. It's like the palace is exhaling. You exhale too. You even speak now and then. Just small things. A thank you. A comment on the weather. One day you tell a maid that the tea smells like cloudberries. She smiles and doesn't correct you because no one knows what cloudberries smell like. But the point is, you're speaking again. You find the old imperial painter still alive. He's 78 now, and mostly blind, but his brush hand is steady as ever. You ask him to paint something, no instructions given. He returns a week later with a scroll showing a tree in winter. No snow, no leaves, just branches and sky. He says it's called stillness before sap. You hang it beside the rotting pineapple. There are whispers of revolts in the west. A salt tax riot in Sichuan. Soldiers refusing to return to post in the north. The usual stress fractures in the bones of an empire this wide. But nothing collapses. The system staggers, but it doesn't fall. Yet, you begin keeping a box of small things on your desk. A stone shaped like a turtle. A whistle carved from ivory. A folded paper crane made by a visiting child. You call it your archive of things that meant nothing but stayed anyway. It grows daily. You hear that poets are writing again? Actual decent poems? Not just flattering odes to emperors and mountains. One young woman from Suzhou publishes a collection titled, Lanterns We Forgot to Light. Someone reads a stanza aloud at dinner and everyone at the table goes quiet for a full minute. Culture, like fungus, thrives in the damp. And speaking of damp, you visit the hot springs near the summer palace one last time. Your knees ache getting there. A small team of aides makes sure you don't fall. But when you finally lower into the water, the pain lifts for a moment. The steam curls up around your face like you're being gently erased. You like the feeling. You dream that night of your father. He doesn't speak. He just sits beside you, both of you facing the same direction, watching cranes fly in a perfectly straight line across the sky. You wake with a strange itch behind your eyes, but no tears. You don't cry anymore. You haven't in years. One morning, a boy recites a poem at court. He's no older than 12, too young to know fear, too young to know flattery. His words are about river stones, how they're shaped by pressure, not intention. Everyone claps. You don't. You just nod, because finally someone understands. One of the last documents placed before you is a proposal to build a library in your name. A massive one, with pillars and statues and a reflecting pool shaped like your signature. You stare at it for a while. Then write simply, let the books speak for themselves. They do. You begin to sleep longer, not out of exhaustion, but preference. Dreams are better now. Slower. Less crowded. Sometimes you dream of places you never visited. Deserts, archipelagos, cities made entirely of glass. Sometimes you dream of silence, just that, a silence so complete it feels warm. The sun rises over the palace. Your son walks through the eastern gate, his robe brushing dew from the steps. Ministers bow, drums beat once, then stop. He doesn't look back. You don't need him to, because you already see. You've seen all you need. The quiet is not empty. It's full, like a library before the doors open, like a field right before it rains, like the empire you once ruled still spinning in all its absurd, sprawling glory. Not because of you, but somehow, with you still in it. Even if only as a shadow. The peach blossoms bloom late this year. You watch from your window as the petals unfold slowly, shyly, like dancers unsure if the music is still playing. A breeze stirs them now and then, and some drift loose, floating downward like little slips of forgotten paper. One lands on your sleeve. You don't brush it off. There's no need for haste anymore. The empire hums along, out there beyond the stone walls, in markets and fishing villages, in the coal-smudged corners of the north and the humid, slow-drifting riverbanks of the south. Life is being lived, deeply, indifferently to your presence, and that, oddly, comforts you. You've ruled longer than anyone can remember. 48 years, if anyone's still counting. Your era name, Wanli, was supposed to mean 10,000 calendars, an eternal span. That sounded ridiculous when you were crowned. Now? It's not far off. And still, it wasn't really about the years, was it? It was about what didn't happen. No glorious conquests, no sweeping reforms, no monuments that split the clouds. Just decades. Quiet ones. You don't go out with a bang. You didn't come in with one either. You arrived like a sigh and stayed like wallpaper. Some say it was wasted time. Others say it was peaceful. Historians still debate your legacy. Was your detachment a form of protest? A subtle rebellion against court ritual? A tired shrug from a man who saw too much too soon? There are camps, scrolls, symposia, arguments that last until the tea goes cold. You leave no answer. You do, however, leave a will. Short, simple, mostly requests about your burial robes, the location of your favorite inkstone, and one odd clause requesting that a particular concubine's parrot be given the respect due a minor official. No one knows what that means. You don't explain it. You don't explain much. Your son holds court in your name now. But everyone understands. The weight has fully shifted. You are the moon in a morning sky. Still there, still visible, but no longer necessary. You no longer attend banquets. You no longer meet foreign dignitaries. You no longer respond when ministers bow. It isn't rude. It's just done. And yet you walk the gardens. That surprises people. You take slow steps. Always at twilight. You nod at the fish in the pond. You stop by the library door. You run your fingers along the weathered stone. You whisper things to no one. And the wind, obliging as ever, carries them away. A child bows to you one evening, a little girl with a red ribbon in her hair. She doesn't know who you are, just that you must be important, or old, or both. You smile. It feels like the first time in a century. That night you ask for a story, not to tell, but to hear. You ask the court reader, now a grizzled man who's been reading to you since your 30s, to pick anything he likes. He chooses an old tale about a turtle who dreams of flying. You listen without interrupting. When it ends, you just say, "That's enough for tonight." And it is! Your sleep deepens. Days pass. And then, one morning, soft light pouring through silk curtains, you don't rise. You don't need to. The palace doesn't panic. It pauses, just a breath, and then continues. They say your last words, spoken to no one in particular, were, "It held together, didn't it?" No one's sure what it meant. The empire? The court? The chair you once sat in? Or maybe it was the story of your life itself. Long, slow, uneventful, but steady. No catastrophe. No collapse. Just the strange, slow miracle of endurance. They bury you with the usual ceremony. Lavish. Echoing. Painted drums and gold-threaded banners. A tomb the size of a village. And yet, even there, there's restraint. You'd grown smaller in people's minds. not in importance, but in sharpness. Like an old melody, hummed more than sung. The mandarins write eulogies. The poets compose verse. One line makes the rounds across the empire. He watched 1,000 moons rise and never blinked. You would have rolled your eyes, or maybe smirked. The empire survives you. It always would have. And in time, even your name grows quiet. Just ink on a calendar. A footnote in a scholar's lesson. A trivia answer for particularly sleepy students. But not forgotten, because every uneventful reign is a bridge between more dramatic ones. And bridges matter. They hold things up, like silence in a song, like breath before speech, like the steady, stubborn reign of Emperor Wanli, the man who did very little for a very long time. And somehow that was enough. The palace is still now. The sun has slipped behind the western wall, casting everything in a soft amber light that feels more like memory than illumination. A breeze filters through the silken drapes, rustling them just enough to whisper across the floor. You hear it, that hush, like the sound of something ancient letting go. You walk one last time through the corridors of thought, past the quiet rooms, past the marble courtyards, past that one ridiculous pineapple, long gone but still vivid in your mind like a dream that made no sense and yet stayed with you. The world does not end with noise. It ends with pause, a breath held, not in fear but in peace. You find your seat. Not a throne now, just a place to rest. You sink into it slowly, letting every bone, every thread of thought settle. There's no need to reach for anything. Everything important has already been touched, already lived, already let go. You're not falling asleep. You're fading inward, like dusk over water, like footprints in sand, softly erased by tide. And as the light dims, as the palace blurs into stillness, you realize nothing needs to happen now, not ever again. Just rest, just quiet, just the slow, patient breath of a world that continues, because it must. Because you did. Sweet dreams.